I heard about that baby you brought home, Tony, Owe said with a smirk. Aren't you worried? Everyone is talking about how strange it is. Tony laughed, a bitter sound. It's not my problem. Ebia is the one who wanted to bring that child into this house. If she wants to live with a cursed baby, that's her choice. Ebia's hands froze as she listened. Her heart ached. Even after all this time, Tony still didn't care about her or Timipa. She bit her lip to keep from crying and continued preparing the food, determined not to let his words hurt her. As the night wore on, Tony and his friends drank more and more, becoming louder with each passing minute. Timipa, who had been sleeping soundly in her crib, began to stir. Her soft whimpers turned into cries, and Ebia hurried to soothe her. Can't you keep that child quiet? Tony shouted, his voice slurred. I'm trying to enjoy my evening. Ebia ignored him and rocked Timipa gently, humming a lullaby. But the baby's cries grew louder, as though she sensed the tension in the room. Suddenly, the air in the small house felt thick, and Ebia noticed something strange. The fire in the hearth, which had been burning steadily, began to flicker and dim, even though there was still plenty of wood. The wind outside picked up, howling through the cracks in the walls, and the room grew colder. Timipa's cries became more frantic, and Ebia's heart raced. What's happening? Owe asked nervously, looking around. Tari, who had been laughing just moments ago, was now silent, his eyes wide with fear. Tony, something's not right. This feels wrong. Tony waved his hand dismissively. It's just a bit of wind. Stop being so superstitious. But deep down, even Tony seemed unsettled. The fire continued to flicker, casting eerie shadows on the walls, and Timipa's cries echoed louder in the small room. Ebia held the baby close, her own heart pounding. She couldn't explain it, but she felt as though something or someone was watching them. Suddenly, the door burst open, slamming against the wall. The wind howled through the house, blowing out the fire completely. The room was plunged into darkness, and the only sound was Timipa's piercing cry. Ebia's hands shook as she tried to comfort the baby. She could hear Tony and his friends scrambling in the dark, their voices filled with fear. Light the fire again, Owe shouted. We need light. Tari was muttering under his breath, this isn't natural, this isn't natural. As Ebia tried to relight the fire, she felt a strange presence in the room. It was as if the very air around her was alive, pulsing with energy. She looked down at Timipa, and to her shock, the baby had stopped crying. Her wide, innocent eyes stared up at Ebia, calm and unafraid. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the wind stopped. The fire flickered back to life, its warmth filling the room once more. The air was still, and everything was quiet. Tony, Owe, and Tari stood frozen, their faces pale with fear. What just happened? Tony whispered, his voice shaking. Ebia held Timipa close, her heart still racing. She didn't have an answer, but one thing was clear, this child was not ordinary. Mama Diri's words echoed in her mind, the river does not leave gifts without purpose. 4 days after the strange incident in the house, Tony acted differently. He became distant, even more so than before. He hardly spoke to Ebia, and when he did, his words were brief and cold. It was clear that whatever had happened that night had scared him. Owe and Tari hadn't visited since, and Ebia noticed that Tony no longer invited his friends over. The house felt empty, and the silence between her and Tony grew heavier. But despite the tension, Ebia found comfort in Timipa. The baby had become her light in the darkness, and every time she looked into Timipa's big, curious eyes, she felt a sense of peace. Ebia couldn't explain it, but something told her that Timipa was meant to be in her life. The baby had brought her a strange, unexplainable strength, and even though the village continued to whisper about the cursed child, Ebia felt more confident than she ever had. One afternoon, Ebia decided to visit Mama Diri again. She needed to understand more about what was happening and why strange things seemed to surround Timipa. With the baby wrapped securely on her back, Ebia made her way to the old woman's hut, which sat at the edge of the village, close to the thick forest. As Ebia approached Mama Diri's home, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The old woman was sitting outside, weaving a basket, her wise eyes lifting to meet Ebeer's as she drew closer. "Ebeer, my daughter," Mama Diri said, her voice gentle. "You've come to seek answers, haven't you?" Ebeer nodded, sitting down beside the old woman. "Strange things have been happening since I brought Timapa home, Mama. That night, when the wind came and the fire went out, it felt like something more than just the weather. I'm scared, but I feel connected to this child. I need to understand what's going on." Mama Diri paused her weaving and looked at Timapa, who was now sleeping peacefully on Ebeer's back. Her eyes were filled with a deep understanding, as though she had seen many things in her long life. "The spirits of the river are powerful, Ebeer," Mama Diri began softly. "And sometimes, they place their blessings in the hands of those who least expect it. Timapa is a child of the river, brought into your life for a reason that is beyond our understanding. You must care for her, protect her, and most importantly, love her. But be warned, the path ahead will not be easy." Ebeer swallowed hard, her heart racing. "What do you mean, Mama?" Mama Diri sighed, her wrinkled hands resting on her lap. "There are those who will fear what they do not understand. The child will grow, and as she grows, so will her connection to the river. Some will see this as a gift, but others will see it as a curse. You must be prepared for what lies ahead." Ebeer's mind spun with questions, but before she could speak again, Mama Diri raised her hand. "Do not worry yourself, my daughter. The spirits have chosen you to be Timapa's mother, and they will guide you. Trust in them, and trust in yourself." Ebeer left Mama Diri's hut feeling both reassured and uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming, something she wasn't prepared for. But no matter what, she was determined to protect Timapa. As the months passed, Timapa grew into a healthy, happy child. She was quick to smile, and her laughter filled the small house with warmth. Ebeer's bond with the child deepened, and she often found herself forgetting about the whispers of the villagers or Tony's growing resentment. The baby was her world, and nothing else mattered. But one day, as Ebeer was returning from the market, carrying Timapa on her back, she noticed a group of women gathered near her house. They were pointing and whispering, their faces filled with fear and suspicion. "That's her," one of them said. "The one with the cursed child." Ebeer's heart sank. She quickened her pace, trying to ignore their words, but as she passed by, one of the women stepped forward. "You should get rid of that child, Ebeer," the woman said harshly, "before she brings more misfortune upon you and the village." Ebeer stopped, her hands trembling with anger. She had heard enough of their cruel words. She turned to face the woman, her voice steady but firm. "Timapa is not cursed. She is a gift, and I will not let anyone speak ill of her." The women gasped, shocked by Ebeer's defiance. They had expected her to stay silent, as she always had before. But Ebeer was no longer the quiet, timid woman they had once known. She was stronger now, and she would do whatever it took to protect her child. As she entered her home, Ebeer felt a sense of pride wash over her. She had stood up for Timapa, for herself. But deep down, she knew that this was just the beginning. The village's fear of the unknown was growing, and soon, she would have to face whatever challenges lay ahead. That evening, as she sat with Timapa in her lap, Ebeer heard a knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat. Tony hadn't been home for days, and she wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, she rose to her feet and opened the door. Standing there was a man she had never seen before. He was tall, with sharp eyes and a serious expression. His clothes were simple, but something about him felt powerful, commanding. "Ebeer," the man said, his voice calm but firm. "I have come to speak to you about the child." Ebeer stood frozen at the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. The man's presence filled the small space, and though he didn't look threatening, there was something about him that unsettled her. She glanced down at Timapa, who was still peacefully asleep in her arms, and then back at the man. "Who are you?" Ebeer asked cautiously, tightening her hold on the baby. The man's eyes softened, and he held up his hands to show that he meant no harm. "My name is Ebizima," he said quietly. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because of the child." Ebeer's heart skipped a beat. "What do you know about Timapa?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ebizima stepped closer, lowering his voice as if to share a secret. The child you are holding is no ordinary child, Ebir. Timapa was born under special circumstances, and there are those who know her true origins. I come from a long line of river guardians, those who protect the sacred connections between the river and the people. The spirits of the river have sent me to watch over Timapa, and to make sure she is safe. Ebir's head spun with questions. But why? Why is Timapa so important? What does the river want with her? Ibizima's expression grew serious. The river is life itself, Ebir. It brings blessings and takes away pain, but it is also a powerful force, one that can't be controlled or understood easily. Timapa carries within her the spirit of the river, a connection so deep that it makes her special. The river chose you to protect her, but there are others who seek to take her for themselves. Ebir's blood ran cold. Who? Who would want to take her? There are people who fear what they do not understand, Ibizima said. They see Timapa as a threat, a danger to the natural order. They don't understand that she is a blessing. There will be those who try to take her from you, Ebir. You must be strong, and you must trust in the river's guidance. Ebir's mind raced. The whispers in the village, Tony's growing distance, and now this mysterious man claiming to be a river guardian, it was all too much. But deep down, Ebir knew there was truth in Ibizima's words. She had felt the power surrounding Timapa ever since the night of the storm. What do I need to do? She asked, her voice trembling. You need to keep Timapa close, Ibizima said. The river will guide you when the time comes. There will be signs, and when you see them, you must follow your heart. But until then, you must protect her from those who would harm her. Ebir nodded, though fear gnawed at the edges of her heart. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew she couldn't let anyone take Timapa from her. The baby had become her life, her source of strength, and she wasn't about to give her up. Ibizima gave her a small, reassuring smile. You are stronger than you think, Ebir. The river chose you for a reason. Trust in that. With that, the man turned and disappeared into the night, leaving Ebir standing in the doorway, clutching Timapa to her chest. The air was still, but Ebir felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it head-on. The days that followed were quiet. Tony continued to stay away from the house, and the villagers, though still whispering behind her back, left Ebir alone. She spent most of her time caring for Timapa, watching the baby grow stronger with each passing day. But even in the calm, Ebir couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something big. One evening, as the sun began to set and the village prepared for nightfall, Ebir heard a loud commotion outside. Shouts echoed through the air, and the sound of heavy footsteps approached her home. Her heart raced as she rushed to the window, peering out into the fading light. A group of men from the village were marching towards her house, led by Tony. Their faces were hard, their eyes filled with anger and fear. Ebir's stomach twisted in knots as she realized they had come for Timapa. She hurried to the crib, where Timapa lay, and scooped the baby into her arms. Her mind raced, there was no time to think. She had to get out of there before the men reached the door. Ebir wrapped Timapa tightly in a cloth, securing her to her back, and darted out the back of the house, slipping into the shadows just as the men arrived at her front door. Where is she? Tony's voice boomed, furious. Bring her out. Ebir held her breath, her heart pounding as she crouched behind a nearby bush. She could hear the men searching the house, their frustration growing as they realized she wasn't there. She's run off, one of the men shouted. We'll find her. Ebir knew she couldn't stay hidden for long. With Timapa on her back, she crept silently through the underbrush, her legs shaking as fear coursed through her. She had no idea where to go, but her instincts pushed her toward the river. The river had always been her place of solace, and now, she hoped it would be her place of safety. As she reached the riverbank, the sound of rushing water filled her ears, calming her nerves. She glanced around, searching for a hiding place, when she saw a figure standing on the edge of the water. It was Ibizima. He stood tall, his eyes fixed on the water as if waiting for something. When he saw Ebir, he motioned for her to come closer. You've done well, Ebir, he said softly. But the time has come. The river calls for Timapa. Ebir's heart clenched. What do you mean? What's going to happen? Ibizima's expression was calm, but his eyes held a deep sadness. "The river will protect her now, but you must let her go." Ebir shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "No, I can't. I can't lose her. She's all I have." Ibizima placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle but firm. "She is the river's child, Ebir. And the river has chosen you to guide her here. But now, it is time for her to fulfill her destiny. Trust in the spirits, and they will take care of her." Ebir's heart broke as she looked down at Timipa, who was still peacefully asleep. How could she let go of the child she had grown to love with all her heart? But deep down, she knew that this was always meant to be. The river had brought Timipa into her life for a reason, and now it was time to give her back. Ebir's hands trembled as she stood by the river, holding Timipa close to her chest. The thought of letting go, of giving up the child who had become her whole world, felt unbearable. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her heart heavy with the weight of what she was about to do. Ibizima stood silently by her side, his gaze steady on the flowing water. The river seemed to hum with energy, its current stronger than before, as if it too was preparing for something monumental. "How can I do this?" Ebir whispered, her voice breaking. "How can I let her go?" Ibizima's voice was soft but resolute. "You must trust the river, Ebir. Timipa has a destiny beyond what you or I can understand. The spirits have chosen her for a great purpose. She will be safe, but only if you let her go now." Ebir looked down at Timipa's sleeping face, her little fingers curled up in peaceful slumber. She wanted to hold on, to run far away where no one could find them, but she knew in her heart that Ibizima was right. This was Timipa's path, and Ebir had been chosen to guide her to it. With a deep, shaky breath, Ebir stepped forward toward the river's edge. The water sparkled in the fading light of the setting sun, casting an almost magical glow over the scene. She knelt by the water, her tears falling silently into the river as she cradled Timipa one last time. "I love you, Timipa," she whispered, pressing a kiss to the baby's forehead. "You will always be a part of me." Slowly, carefully, Ebir placed Timipa in the shallow water, her hands lingering for a moment as she fought against every instinct to pull the baby back into her arms. But then, as if guided by unseen hands, the current began to gently carry Timipa downstream. Ebir watched, her heart aching, as the baby floated peacefully along the river's surface. The water cradled Timipa as though it had been waiting for her all along. In the distance, Ebir could see the faint outline of a glowing light, soft, warm, and welcoming, rising from the river itself. As the light grew brighter, it enveloped Timipa, lifting her gently into the air. Ebir's breath caught in her throat as she watched the baby rise, carried by the light. The glow around Timipa intensified until it was almost too bright to look at, and then, in a flash, both the baby and the light disappeared, leaving nothing but the sound of the river rushing softly. Ebir fell to her knees, her chest heaving with sobs. The pain of letting go was overwhelming, but at the same time, she felt a strange sense of peace. The river had taken Timipa, just as it had brought her, and Ebir knew in her heart that the baby was safe. Ibizima stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have done something great today, Ebir. The spirits will watch over Timipa now, and they will bless you for your courage." Ebir nodded, though the pain still weighed heavy on her heart. She stood slowly, wiping her tears as she gazed out over the river. It was calm again, as if the magic of the moment had passed, and everything was back to normal. "Will I ever see her again?" Ebir asked quietly. Ibizima smiled softly. "Perhaps. The river works in mysterious ways. But for now, you must live your life, knowing that you were a part of something greater." With that, Ibizima turned and began to walk away, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. Ebir stood alone by the river, the soft breeze tugging at her clothes. The village was far behind her now, its whispers and fears fading into the distance. As she made her way back home, Ebir felt a sense of peace settling over her. Though her heart ached with the loss of Timipa, she knew she had done the right thing. The river had chosen her for this journey, and now it was time for her to start a new chapter in her life. And so, Ebir walked forward, leaving the past behind, her heart filled with both sorrow and hope for what the future would bring.